At 80 years old, Henry Winkler, the beloved actor who brought smiles to millions as the Fonz on Happy Days, is facing a heartbreaking chapter in his life that few fans could have imagined. For decades, Winkler was Hollywood's symbol of charm, resilience, and good humor. Behind that ever-present smile, though, has been a lifetime of struggle, pain, and perseverance that only now is coming fully to light. To the world, he was the epitome of cool. The leather jacket, the confident grin, the finger-pointed, "Aye!" That became a cultural catchphrase. But off-screen, Henry's life was far from picture-perfect. He spent years fighting inner battles that fame couldn't fix. Battles that shaped not just his career, but his very identity. From growing up with parents who didn't understand him to spending much of his life hiding his struggles with dyslexia, Winkler's road to success was paved with heartbreak and humiliation. Now, as the actor reflects on his 50-year career and the passing of many of his closest friends and co-stars, the reality of age, loss, and legacy weighs heavily on him. The man who once brought joy to millions admits that he's learning to say goodbye, not just to the people he's lost, but to the life and industry that made him who he is. It's a story that's as inspiring as it is tragic, a reminder that even the brightest stars carry shadows. This is the heartbreaking truth about Henry Winkler at 80, a man who gave so much laughter to the world, while quietly enduring pain of his own. Long before Henry Winkler became a television icon, his story was one of heartbreak, rejection, and quiet determination. Born in 1945 to German Jewish immigrants who fled the horrors of Nazi Germany, young Henry grew up in New York City feeling like an outsider in his own home. His parents, strict and ambitious, had high expectations, and when Henry struggled in school, they mistook his learning difficulties for laziness. What no one knew at the time was that Henry suffered from severe dyslexia, a condition that would go undiagnosed until adulthood. Reading, writing, and memorizing lines were daily battles. "I was called stupid, lazy, and not living up to my potential," Henry once revealed. "My parents had a word for it, Dummkopf, which means dumb head. I heard it every day." Those words cut deep, leaving emotional scars that would follow him well into his adult life. Despite the ridicule, Henry held on to one dream: to become an actor. He poured all his energy into performing, relying on his instincts and charm to compensate for what he couldn't read on the page. After graduating from Yale Drama School, he moved to Los Angeles with just a few $100s and an unshakable belief that he could make it. Then, in 1973, his life changed forever. He landed the role of Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli on Happy Days, a character originally written as a minor sidekick. But from his first appearance, audiences were captivated. With his slicked-back hair, leather jacket, and signature, "Aye." The Fonz became a phenomenon, and Henry Winkler was suddenly one of the most recognizable faces in America. Behind the fame, however, Henry's insecurities never truly disappeared. Memorizing scripts was a constant struggle due to his dyslexia. To cope, he developed clever tricks, memorizing the rhythm of his lines, using emotional cues, or asking others to read scripts aloud. Few people knew how hard he was working behind the scenes, just to deliver the effortless charm fans loved. But with fame came pressure. Henry was suddenly typecast as the Fonz, a character so iconic that it overshadowed everything else he tried to do. "I loved the Fonz," he admitted years later, "but I lost myself for a while. I forgot who Henry was. When Happy Days ended in 1984, the phone stopped ringing. Hollywood, once obsessed with him, had moved on. The years that followed were some of the darkest of his life. He faced financial struggles, career disappointments, and deep anxiety about what would come next. "I thought my career was over," he confessed. "I had been put in a box and no one wanted to see me as anything else." But Henry's story didn't end there. What makes his journey so powerful is not just the heights of his success, but the way he found the strength to rebuild himself after fame faded. Behind the Fonz's smile was a man who refused to give up, even when the world seemed to have forgotten him. When Happy Days ended in 1984, Henry Winkler found himself adrift. For a man who had once been the face of television cool, the silence that followed was deafening. Casting directors no longer called, and producers couldn't see him as anything but the Fonz. The very role that had made him a legend now seemed to have locked him in a cage. In interview after interview, Henry described those years as some of the most painful of his life. "I couldn't get a job. I was famous, but I was invisible," he once said. His self-confidence, already fragile from years of self-doubt, began to crumble. Friends remember how the once energetic actor became withdrawn and uncertain, struggling to understand who he was without the fame that had defined him. But true to his nature, Henry refused to let despair win. He realized that if Hollywood wouldn't give him opportunities, he'd create them himself. Transitioning into producing and directing, he began to rebuild his life behind the camera. One of his biggest early successes came with MacGyver, the action-adventure series he helped produce, a show that went on to become a global hit. Still, while his career slowly recovered, Henry continued to battle private pain. His lifelong dyslexia remained a constant challenge, and he feared people would find out and think less of him. It wasn't until his stepson, Jed, was diagnosed with the same condition that Henry finally understood the full truth of his struggle. "I looked at him," Henry said, "and realized that's me. That's what I've been fighting my whole life." This revelation marked a turning point. Instead of hiding his condition, Henry began to speak openly about it. His vulnerability inspired millions. He visited schools, gave talks, and eventually co-authored a best-selling series of children's books about a young boy with dyslexia named Hank Zipser, a character based on his own experiences. For the first time, Henry's pain had become his purpose. "I wanted kids who struggle like I did to know they're not dumb," he said. "They just learn differently." His books became a phenomenon, helping countless children see that their challenges didn't define their worth. But even as he found fulfillment in writing and producing, the ghosts of the past never fully disappeared. Many of Henry's close friends from Happy Days, including Gary Marshall and Aaron Moran, began to pass away over the years. Each loss hit him hard, reminding him of the fleeting nature of fame and life itself. When Aaron Moran, who played Joni Cunningham, died in 2017, Henry posted a heartbreaking tribute. "I will always think of you with laughter and affection. Rest now, my sweet Joni." It was a stark reminder that time spares no one, not even the people who once made the world laugh. Through it all, Henry never stopped working or caring. Even as the years weighed on him, his heart remained full of compassion for his fans, his colleagues, and the countless people who saw in him a symbol of strength. As Henry Winkler entered his later years, his career took on a second life, and so did his outlook on fame, family, and what truly matters. After decades of being remembered only as the Fonz, he found renewed respect in Hollywood through roles that allowed him to show the depth and humanity behind his humor. His award-winning performance as Gene Cousineau in HBO's Barry introduced Henry to a new generation of fans, proving that even in his 70s, he could still command the screen with charisma and emotional power. Yet behind the accolades, there was also a quiet sadness. The older Henry became, the more aware he grew of time slipping away, not just his own, but that of the people who had shaped his life. Many of his closest friends and co-stars had passed on. Ron Howard, one of the few Happy Days castmates still active in Hollywood, often spoke about how much Henry missed the sense of family they once had. "He's one of the kindest, most genuine people I've ever met," Howard once said. But losing those who shared his journey has really affected him. Henry has also spoken candidly about the challenges of aging in an industry obsessed with youth. Roles became fewer, opportunities smaller, and yet his heart remained just as full of ambition as ever. "You get to a point," he once said, "where you stop chasing fame and start chasing peace." For him, that peace came from family. He's been married to Stacey Weitzman since 1978, a rare Hollywood love story that endured every storm. Together, they raised 2 children and built a quiet, loving home away from the spotlight. But even in that peace, tragedy has lingered at the edges. The passing of friends, the decline of his mentors, and his own health scares have reminded him that life is fragile. In interviews, he has spoken with heartbreaking honesty about mortality, how losing so many of his peers forced him to confront his own. "You don't realize how fast time goes," he said softly during one appearance. "You blink, and the people who helped you become who you are, they're gone." The Hollywood spotlight, once thrilling, now feels distant to him. What matters most now are the simple moments. His grandchildren's laughter, quiet dinners at home, walks through his garden. "I used to think success was being recognized," he said. "Now I think it's being remembered, not for what I did, but for how I made people feel." Despite his joyful demeanor, those close to Henry know the pain he carries runs deep. The boy who grew up being called dumb by his parents, the man who fought dyslexia in silence, and the aging actor watching the world move on without him. All of these versions of Henry Winkler live inside him still. But through it all, one thing remains unchanged: his kindness. Even in heartbreak, he continues to uplift others, signing autographs with warmth, mentoring young actors, and showing that true greatness isn't measured by fame. It's measured by grace. At 80 years old, Henry Winkler's story has come full circle, from the insecure boy called dumb to the man the world now calls inspiring. Time has softened the pain, but it hasn't erased it. Instead, it has shaped him into someone who leads with empathy, humility, and a quiet strength that comes from decades of triumph and heartbreak. In recent years, Henry has become more reflective than ever. He's spoken often about gratitude, for the fans who never forgot him, for the second chance Hollywood gave him, and for the family who stood by him through every storm. "I am the luckiest man," he said in a recent interview. "Not because of fame or money, but because I'm still here. I get to tell people that no matter how far you fall, you can still stand up again." Henry's later life renaissance with shows like Barry and Arrested Development proved that talent never fades. It only matures. When he finally won his first Emmy in 2018, after more than 40 years in the business, the moment was emotional not just for him, but for everyone who had followed his journey. "If you stay at the table long enough," he said with tears in his eyes, "the chips come to you." It was a metaphor not just for Hollywood, but for life itself. Patience, persistence, and faith in one's worth. Beyond the screen, Henry's true impact lies in the hearts he's touched. His openness about dyslexia changed lives. Countless children who once felt less than found hope through his Hank Zipser books and school visits. Teachers, parents, and kids alike have called him a hero, not for being the Fonz, but for being the voice they needed. "He showed us that you don't have to be perfect to be powerful," one teacher wrote after hearing him speak. But even heroes grow tired. Friends close to Henry admit that he's begun to slow down, taking fewer public appearances and spending more time in the quiet of his home. He has spoken wistfully about mortality, about losing so many friends, and how grateful he is to have made it this far. "Every day is a bonus round," he said softly in a recent interview. "I've lived more life than I ever dreamed I would." The tragedy, perhaps, is that time doesn't pause for kindness. Watching Henry grow older has been bittersweet for fans, a reminder that even the brightest lights eventually dim. But what makes his story extraordinary is that he never let bitterness take root. Through loss, rejection, and aging, he remained gracious, funny, and full of heart. And that is the legacy Henry Winkler leaves behind. Not just the image of the Fonz with a leather jacket and a grin, but the spirit of a man who turned his pain into purpose, his flaws into art, and his heart into a beacon for others. When the curtain finally falls on his remarkable life, Henry Winkler will be remembered not for how loud he laughed, but for how deeply he cared. A legend not of ego, but of empathy. A man who taught the world that even coolness can have a soul.